almost klaar. Hè? Welcome everybody. Welcome to this start of the program after the summer, which is the first evening actually for us. And this is Schools Out number 44, so it's we've been doing this a couple of times before. I see a lot of new faces, so let me shortly explain where you are and what the school is. The independent school for the city, we usually explain it as a school for people who already went to school, who already have an education, a diploma, who usually have a couple of years of work experience, professionals who feel that they should broaden their horizon and therefore follow one of the courses that we offer. And these differ from 1 day courses to 3 months and have to do with the 3 themes that we think are very urgent nowadays for anyone who is an urbanist, be it historian, sociologist, architect, designer, whatever. And those are the climate change and the Anthropocene, the right to the city, and the super diversity of the makeup of the city. So these are the 3 themes that we usually address in our courses. And we have one coming up, Into the Woods, which is going to be an interesting one, 21st to 25 of October. And we're going to work with Lola architect Peter Veenstra, coupled with an ecologist, Ronald Buiting. And together we're going to examine the soil, the qualities, the improvement of the soil, how to create biodiversity, and how to actually plant a small microforest in the desert of Rotterdam. And then we're doing Fables of the Reconstruction in November. If you are interested in all the the physical as well as the social aspects of reconstruction of destroyed areas, cities that have been destroyed by war or by nature. We are doing this for the 2nd time, and this time we focus on the cities in Ukraine, but also on Gaza. And of course this is a difficult topic, but we feel that this is also already the moment to discuss what aspects are being contested there. And then we're doing a short workshop with Studio Ossidiana, which is a hands-on studio making, as they often do, making concrete with extra materials, in this case waste materials, and then polish it and make it into a kind of a luxury, beautiful materials. And what we're also doing, well, actually, I think our whole program is pretty interesting, but this is also quite good. A Back to School With series on climate justice. And in this case, we'll work with Lena Knappers and Bram van Ooyen. And it's a series of 3 lectures in which we will discuss different aspects of climate justice. And then, of course, our school organizes every last Friday of the month, which is usual because of Florian being very difficult. This is the 3rd Friday of the month. Usually it's the 4th. And then we have a speaker which we really like and admire, and we give him the floor, him or her. Usually it's also followed by a short movie selected by the AFFR curator Jorten Hollander. But not today. Today we're doing the lecture of Florian Idenburg. And yeah, let me shortly introduce him. Actually, we've known Florian for quite a long time, 2 decades probably. And this especially goes for my colleague Wouter, who was part of his graduation commission. And it is a coincidence that today Wouter was on a trip along a number of Karel Weber buildings. Who was the head, that was your mentor at the graduation? So yeah, there are a few links between us for a longer time. But since Florian is Dutch, but yeah, you've probably spent quite not so many days in Holland the last decades, because after graduating at the TU, he went to Tokyo to work with Sejima at the Sana office. Something that I think you can still recognize in your work. And working on the New Arts Museum in New York, I guess you kind of stayed there and started in 2008 the office of So-Il together with Jing Liu. So this is an office that they have gotten numerous awards and prizes and publications. And they're working very internationally. And also their work is informed by global perspectives. I think that's very interesting to see. Also, the working that you do on the, not the quantity, but the quality of housing and social housing. So there's a lot of overlap with the themes that the school is interested in. And I'm really happy that you are the speaker here, because Florian Idenburg is really one of our guests that is a bit too famous actually for this stage. So here we go. The floor is yours.
Thank you. A little bit too famous. It's a lot of pressure, especially if my old mentor is here. Yeah, I thought it would be nice. So Michelle already described how I left from the Netherlands to Japan, and then we started our office. So I won't dwell too much on that. But indeed, what we will show, or what I will show, is the work we do, Jing and I and our team. And I actually tried to cramp sort of 2 lectures in one, so it might be a little bit of a hybrid. And you'll see the cut. And in the end, I will try to sell you a book, of which this is the really first print. It's actually printed in the Netherlands. It doesn't have the cover yet. So I just got it yesterday. So let's see how well the talk goes, and who knows, there's a QR code actually. You get a discount. So we got it all. We got it all. So after Japan, Jing and I, so being raised in the Netherlands and learning in Delft, sort of every other semester was a social housing semester. And Jing, sometimes describing herself as a communist, we ended up in America. And we were always struggling a little bit with this question of the role of architecture in a place where there is no government that builds necessarily, at least since 1974, the government doesn't build anymore, where actually every single commission is a private one. And so where, you know, the drivers of, say, an architectural practice put you very much in a sort of a force field in which this idea of, say, optimization is one of the things that you are asked to do. And this idea of rationalization, which is maybe, I told this story just to Wouter when I graduated. Karel Weber, the Uber rationalist, he said my thesis was a critique on the school, and Wouter's question was who the better, or he asked me, or that was Wouter's question, and then Weber said the better the answer, the lower your grade. That one of the reasons why I went to Japan is because I wanted to learn something beyond sort of the rational and beyond this idea of architecture in service of optimization. But then when you look at New York and the history of architecture there and the role of architecture there, this is Philip Johnson when he was young, and you see sort of how we are always trying to make things thinner to an extent, right? And how you're trying to create less material and more space, because space is money. And so the thinner layer between the public and the private, between the inside and the outside, the more value you can generate. What kind of value, however. Kevin Roche, when he was still working for Saarinen, he prides himself for being the inventor of the reflective coat, the low E coating that allows facades to be even thinner and perform even better. So there is the layer again gets optimized, and the distance between the public realm and the gross and the net basically gets almost to zero, and that's what's being celebrated in the past, in the 80s, and still, right? So, what do you do as an architect if this is what you're asked to do? Obviously, there have been critiques often in Europe about the sort of the anonymity of this modernist drive of optimization, or this question of what is beyond that layer, right? That thin veil that separates the inside from the outside. And so if you look still at today's, often and actually more and more, you could argue, and probably even here, the people that are interested in making buildings are operating in this field, and what is being celebrated as freedom, right, is exactly this. And so, unfortunately, within that system, there's sometimes not space or the recognition of, say, other people that are participating in the labor and maintenance, for instance. And this image is quite incredible, where the workers had to literally sort of punch a hole through this veil, right, through this edge, to get sort of pulled back into the system, back into the grid. Every day, thousands of birds crash into this thin layer. And so we some of the work, so this idea of say transparency, this promise of transparency, right? And of most museums, their ground floors are called fora or agora, or these terms. But as soon as there is a little bit of tension, and as soon as they actually have to act as a forum, they get boarded up because of insurance requirements and other fears. And so we've been thinking a lot about depth and a different type of modernity that is maybe less thin, that is more fuzzy, more blurry, less defined, more atmospheric. And so because we do think that an architect should sort of participate in the system and should try to work within these forces, but not necessarily to just optimize certain values, but maybe there's other values to optimize. So I wanted to show two projects first that maybe talk about this idea of depth and how you can sort of create depth within a world that is driven by private finance. One on the scale of the building, then on the scale of a smaller sort of campus. And then I'll try to sell you this book. So this is an old project. It's actually our first built project, and I think it's very important. And sometimes these first projects are very formative, and they have a big impact on everything that comes afterwards. And even since my thesis, I've been interested in the idea of sort of the undefining the edge, sort of an anti-diagram in a way. The idea that there is multiple ways of reading, and there's no wrong interpretation. Michelle has spoke about sort of this idea of working across cultures, and actually the acceptance of misunderstanding. So the acceptance of not fully clarifying something allows for certain communication. Meaning, if I see a cloud, or we look at a cloud, you see the Eiffel Tower, I see a crocodile. It's both are okay, if you know what I mean. Like it's a cloud, but you like the ability to be able to read things in different ways without judging one over the other. And so for form, I think that's also really important. I know we love to create forms that are so legible that everybody immediately understands what it is supposed to be, a diagram building, but I think there's something to say about buildings that take more time to be understood. This project was in, or is in Korea. It's a gallery. Maybe you've seen it sometimes. It has been published quite a bit, but it's maybe nice to tell the story about how it came to about. So this is the site. Actually, there is a while ago. But what was quite amazing is in this image, which we've found, because we do tend to look at context and we look at sort of the histories of a site, is that here the build and the atmosphere, the mood, in a way, the environment are sort of one, right? It's like it's very hard to distinguish between, say, the constructed space and the environment. And so when we were asked to make this gallery, and this is a gallery that had grown over time within this quite historic neighborhood, K1, K2, K3. K3 was the box we were asked to make. And if you think of what is a gallery is a box, right? It's the more neutral the box, the better, the more flexible, because it ultimately represents sort of a market. And so ultimately, when you're asked to work on a commercial gallery space, it is like the most neutral, efficient, nondescript box. But then the neighborhood, had this layers of history, had a materiality, had a grain, and so we said we can't just insert this large box without anything inside. We started to push programs out. We tried to figure out how to make the building sort of less boxy, but it started to become really a diagram, and we realized it was maybe too hard as a diagram, and so. Last moment when we went to present the project, we sort of wrapped it in this stretched fabric that we had lying in the office. And our client, a busy lady, she had 2 minutes for the meeting. She saw the model. She said, "I like it." She said, "Make it." So that was it. And so that was great, but we had no idea what it was. How do you make it? We knew it needed to be strong, but it also needed to be pliable. We didn't want to build this structure. We were not interested in the construction of form. And there is a different line in architecture, maybe not so popular in this country, but where sort of the creation of very specific forms is of interest. We were much more interested in the effect and the idea of the sort of the lack of definition of these edges. And so we came across this material, which is not used on the scale of architecture. It's used on the scale of people who believe they live in a different era. It's also used for butcher gloves, for fencing gear, what have you. And so we started to work. We found why is this pliable? I mean, the most amazing thing is, right, it's very strong, but it takes on these organic forms. And so we started to work. We understood the material. We started to mock up in the office in different scales in cardboard. We worked with our engineer to figure out sort of how the force field works, and we were able to start to model it. And at some point, we were able to model the whole thing in the computer. And then we built a big model in the office with available mesh that you can buy online. And then also this idea emerged that we might be able to make this completely seamless. And so then we went to Alibaba.com, and because this is not something that you can buy anywhere, it's not a product, and we ended up Skyping a lot with the town Anping, with a lady called Ring. And after Skyping for a couple of months, we ended up in Anping, and Anping was a 6-hour drive from Beijing. In a small courtyard. We ended up courtyard half the size of this room, and there was Ring's brother, and he was welding all these things together by hand. And it had taken about a couple of months before this sample came. Here is Jing. There's Mike, our engineer. This is Ring. Here, me with hair. And this is where Jing explains that we need 500,000 rings. And so this took them a month, but then Ring said, everybody can weld in this town. So why don't we go to the next courtyard and the next courtyard and the next courtyard? And we got the whole gang together, and we made actually a little video that people shared on their phone, and we made some sort of system where people could collaboratively, weld these meshes together. We used a local yard to test. Actually, one of us ended up living there for a couple of weeks. The only place one could stay, the hotel, was also the brothel and the restaurant. So that was quite an experience. But anyway, we used the schoolyard for testing, and upon approval, we were able to start installing it. And so that happened with guys who normally work in the harbor. It was very important to distribute the load of the mesh, so we had to figure out how to do that. So that, because it's very heavy, it's stainless steel. If you hang it on one ring, it would snap. And so throughout the installation, making sure that the load is spread. And after everything was sort of hung and the drape was created, we were able to weld the individual pieces together. Here we're tucking it underneath, and then a completely sort of seamless cloak was created around this maybe almost Dutch diagram. And so it's a box. The circulation is pushed out. That is what pushes the mesh out, and it creates that in between space. So we like daylight. There's a skylight all the way around in the gallery, but very flexible, different shows, a theater underneath, and then that sort of space in between, right? Because it's like, is it inside? Is it outside? Is it poché? Is it? We try to have the mesh and the concrete in some way have the same color, so it really sometimes you don't know, but it's also the space, which is the space for movement, for circulation, for connecting to the public terrace above. And I like this image because it shows sort of the relationship also between the historical context and the building. It was a landmarked district, and so actually the roof lines were one of the reasons why we got a permit. And the argument that we would treat the fabric with the same attention, in a way, and the same attention to detail as the historic context. So this to explain maybe how you can create depth in a private context on the scale of a building. And recently we finished a small arts campus in Brooklyn in New York, which also is for somebody, a private person who loves the arts but doesn't want to necessarily build a big house and show her art, but actually wants to have a space for artists to be. I don't know if people have been to Bushwick. Bushwick is a very industrial sort of warehouse district where now there's breweries and hip restaurants and clubs, but it's quite a large swath of the city in Brooklyn. And all these buildings are buildings that are built to the edge because they are, again, boxes for production, right? They are manufacturing boxes, so there's maximum occupancy. In New York, you have zoning and zoning laws and FAR, much like here, so it tells you how much floor area you can build. And all of these buildings are literally maxed out FAR max, one would say. And it means that there's no space in between, and it's just trucks and industry and truck yards. And this is a mini storage actually next door, and the site where we were asked to create an oasis for artists to be and create and be thoughtful and have ideas, because it's a residency, and so artists get invited to be here, to have an address in the city, to be able to meet people within the arts world, because New York is getting increasingly expensive. And so that was the brief amongst these two sites. And so here you see the existing building. This was a Chinese stone cutter. We reused this building, and the back was their loading dock. That's where we added the building. You see the mini storage on the left. Next door is actually it's a poultry abattoir, so the chicken blood sometimes drips down the street here. And so how, in this context, do you create a nice, welcoming, comfortable space where the artists didn't even have to produce work. They're invited to be there and to think and to work on projects and to just have a comfortable space. And so we started to think about depth more on an urban level and trying to introduce sort of a secondary scale of urbanism. We were between these two streets and actually the three lots. And so rather than sort of maximizing the floor area and building up, to the site boundaries, we decided to create in between sort of alleyways and the ability to actually navigate between these buildings, through the block, to have sort of a through block connection that would be public. And the other thing, so there is gallery space, there is offices, there's a sort of public auditorium / black box theater, and then there are the studio spaces for the artists. And then there's a bookshop and a cafe. So we thought we'd take the most public programs, the bookshop and the cafe that is open for everybody throughout the week, and the performing arts space, the space that is for public lectures and events. And rather than putting them on the street, we put them as deep in the block as possible. So the most public programs go as deep in the block as possible, where the more private programs are in smaller buildings, sort of at the edge, because the streets are really, they're a little bit even uncomfortable at night. And so we thought maybe by bringing the public deep into the block, you have a completely different urban experience than one would have when walking these industrial streets. So in section on the right, you see the existing building that turned to a gallery and a bookshop and a cafe. Then a courtyard in between, then gallery, a double high space. Here's the artist studios with a shared living room below and artist space above, and then the performing space, event space with, again, courtyards in between. And this idea to have the ability to enter the building here and walk all the way through the building to the other building, and later you'll see we made sort of a reference, a visual cue, almost classic Vista idea on the building on the other side. Here in context, the model. And so then, when you make 4 buildings at once, do you make them all the same? Or do you make them all different? Do you make them all different colors? We had to sort of figure out what is the governing, language of 4 semi-related buildings. And so we set a set of rules, which is basically, first of all the material we need to be able to find within a mile radius. It's a quite productive site, right? There's like metal workers, and there was even a concrete plant at the end of the street, so that was a somewhat easy one, but there was a brickyard. And so we said, let's get all our construction materials from, a mile radius. The other thing is we've learned that art spaces, they want to be closed boxes, right? They want to be just as big and anonymous box as possible. And so we said, let's have a datum in every elevation that just creates a sort of more human scale. Let's split it up from the exterior, where there's a shift either in material or a shift in sheen, a shift in texture. And then let's take every opportunity, maybe similar to what you saw in the gallery, the Kukje Gallery, to use program to deform and to give particularity to some of these volumes that you as you move, through the building, through the campus, these buildings help you orient and sort of find your way. And so rather than making a lot of drawings, we actually started to work with those materials. Over time, we've met some people like Harry, who is a mason, and there's this amazing brick. The people that have these, sometimes you have only money for one belt, and it's like black on the outside and brown on the inside, right? And you can flip it, the flip belt. This is the flip brick. So this is like rough on 2 sides and smooth on 2 sides. And normally you use it in a flat wall if you want to do a rough wall or a flat wall. But in this case, we, with Harry, figured out if we rotate it 45, you can actually have 4 different sides. So you have rough, 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 smooth, 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 and smooth, rough. And that actually subtly changes completely the light, around this building. And so with some of these, working with the material, we defined the palette. This is unistrut. It's normally used to, hang your ducts and everything, but we thought we should use it for all the sort of the perimeter boundaries and sort of make it exposed. And brick gets extruded normally through a die, and this is the back of the brick, and this is the front of the brick. But by flipping it, and by making the grout the same color as the brick itself, suddenly it starts to not look like a brick wall anymore, and it becomes sort of this pattern. And similarly for concrete, we did it. This is the window in a wink to Lina Bobardi, who was always very good at working with people on site in defining sort of her architecture, and sort of a respect in a way also of work, the people that you're working with and what they can do. We thought at the end of this vista there is a little Lina Bobardi wink. And so literally the sort of crafting, this is quite nice. The floor also, we thought it's important if you enter the space on the campus, what is shared, and we wanted to have a physical experience as you enter the site. And so now all our sneakers are so thin that you immediately feel the texture change. And so we made this rake, and we worked with the guys to create this almost Zen garden, but then fixed pattern that when you enter the site, you feel sort of the difference under your feet. So quickly walking through, on the right, in the back you see Manhattan, this is Bushwick, you see the 4 buildings. You enter, and this idea again of layering space and creating these sort of transitions, and obviously this reduces maybe the gallery space, but maybe it enhances this experience from inside to outside. You come in through this courtyard, the brick you see flip from at that line, but the ground continues, and it's sort of this gradual transition into the space of the art, and then back to the circulation space. And the brick comes back. We reuse the skylights. It's very nice if you find yourself in New York to come by. They have very good programming. They have readings in the bookshop. The bookshop is very well curated, and a cafe where you can work and hear the courtyard. And just a slight turn as you come into the courtyard space. And here, for instance, the balcony for the office is also the marquee in a way, because the entrance is not at the street, but the entrance is deeper in the block. So this sort of defines where the front door is. Offices. Extra high space behind that aluminum extruded. Not extruded. It's just a standard grill that you use, a mechanical grill, but it allows for daylight to come in, but not direct, so it blocks the direct light. As a tall space. You see it here. The skylight is behind there. And this is the arts building, so the datum here stops because, or it's the differentiation between smooth concrete and this corrugated concrete. Inside, acoustic plaster that completely changes the acoustics, the experience. It's super silent here. This is the shared sort of room for the artists to be. With a reading nook where they, and you see this relationship between, it's pretty obvious, but I think how the volume pushes out into the garden and creates sort of definition in that space as well. We worked with a local landscape designer, Future Green, who planted all the trees. They're all local species. They call it the empty lot aesthetics. So it's like almost like the stuff that will grow if you don't do anything. And what is nice is it became really part of so it supports the neighborhood. So a lot of programs that can't find space are now being hosted here as well. And so really it became sort of a porous host for a neighborhood where maybe it's hard to find space. So that was the idea of depth, and then I thought. I'll talk how to apply the same idea to some of the residential projects we've been working on. It started with this notion that actually it started with Fenna and the Balmer, or the idea of thinking through in our current models of housing, this circulation is being squeezed and reduced and eliminated to something very dreadful. You'll see that in a little bit, but there's a long history, of course, and especially also here in the city, of the exterior street and the idea of public life sort of through density in stacked buildings, and rather than the sort of private corridors that are anonymous and dreadful. But also, if you look at sort of the history of these, and some of them that survived and some of them that were destroyed, it's like trying to figure out, what works and what doesn't work, and how can something like that work in today's day and age. And that's a little bit what we're trying to do with this book. So this book is not about housing as a sort of a typological thing. We've been working, actually since COVID more than anything, more locally with initially two young guys, developers, Sam and Seba. He's the son of Tom Main, of all people. On these residential projects. It started with a project in Leon, I will show that later. But basically throughout, with our background in Delft and this idea that housing and living in the city is not just something that needs to be fully defined by the market, but that we need to think of sort of other values. We've been trying to sort of get into that space in New York City, and only recently this started to work. And so this book is sort of what talks about that. And so, again, this idea of what is the minimum amount of space. So this is some spreads out of the book. What is what we need to live in the city? And so there is a number of essays, and it speaks through sort of how dealing with density, and it's obviously focused somewhat on New York, and how through the history of zoning and code did always in a sort of reactive way that the typology was shaped. So there's always the drive for density, the drive for optimization against, say, life safety, or there's small things that push back, but it is never sort of driven by desires. It's actually always driven by in a sort of a defensive mode. And so you see some of this evolution in New York City, and we talk about the idea also of mechanical systems, and the idea that the envelope, suddenly that edge is again this definition that is so hard between what we can climatize and what is the wild outside, what is sellable, rentable, and what is that the public needs to take care of. And so this has led also to a material culture that is all about thinning that layer. So you saw the curtain wall in office buildings, and in residential there's a beautiful product called EFIS that is basically a combination of insulation and a render and a paint, which is sort of the thinnest optimized material one can use in order again to build. And so this is the status of say the journey from the street to the home one has in most buildings in New York, the double-loaded corridor as a driver. And so Nick Kemper, a friend, he came up with this nice article, Cancel the Corridor, which is in the book, which speaks a lot about sort of this experience. So we look at poetry and other experiences, other ideas of interiority that are soft. We talk about what does it mean to actually inhabit the city. We refer to light ways. What is home? What is the boundary of the home? What is the way? How can we think of devices that operate and exist within the city? Maybe some of these are familiar. I would recommend you reading more about it. And then we start talking about some of the projects that we have been dealing with and started to explore that boundary. One early project was for a sort of nomadic home that is really more a sort of coat. It's a steel structure that assembles. It fits within a shopping or in a shipping container. And then that gets cloaked in this sort of drape. It is actually a cloak that absorbs the toxins in the air. It has a little magnetic coating, and then it sort of washes off. So the installation is called Breathe, and it questions, privacy, climate, and the relationship to the exterior. This is, of course, temporary, and also these relationships with others, not just in the same space, but between different layers. And recently we worked on the ADU, that is a additional dwelling unit. So LA wants to densify by building another building in your backyard as a prefab thing. It's a way to densify within a place where most buildings are privately owned, individual family homes. And then questioning how do you create sort of the particularity, which we speak about in the beginning, this idea of home not just as a box that is minimal and predefined by the market, but really something that can incorporate your own, say, desires into a more dense setting. And so that's what we have been trying to do since they're the open corridor. From the beginning, this is one of our first projects, up to 35, student housing. And here we swapped in a way, oh no, maybe I'll go a little bit fast, it's fine, we'll go a little bit faster. We speak about different scales, but this is about housing that has, daylight from both sides, micro units, and then a first project where we were actually able to really think through this on a larger scale was social housing in Mexico, in León. So the values of cross ventilation, of connection to the exterior, of collective space, shared space, and also sort of open circulation. I should say a lot of these pictures are by our dear friend Iwan Baan, who, as you know, is very great at showing life and architecture as it lives within its context. And here you see the context of León, Mexico. The mayor of León said it's the ugliest city in Mexico. It's the city where a lot of the car industry that used to be in Detroit moved here. So it's 3 hours north of Mexico City. The inner harbor, it's called, the airport is bilingual, Japanese and Spanish, because there's a lot of car manufacturing here. And because of that, it's the fastest growing city for migrant labor in Mexico. So not only people from Mexico, the country, but from all Latin America, they end up here, and they end up building their own home. 50% of the people in Mexico live in self-built homes on land that is not necessarily theirs. But then since all the land outside of the city is public land, one can actually build there. And so the housing authority, IMUVI, the Institut Municipal de Vivienda, most of them are people, are attorneys and lawyers that help legalize illegally built settlements. But the mayor said, we can't go on with the city expanding low-rise. How do we build a typology that services this group, but at a higher density? And that's what we were asked to do through a series of workshops. Here you see one of the, I think it's a Ford factory in the back, and the way in which the housing, starts to occur around it. And then there were initiatives by the government. Those were all low-rise, because the claim was that people don't want to live vertically, but because of the distance from the city centers, a lot of those ended up being squatted. People were not being able to pay their mortgage. The program is that people actually become homeowners. And so a lot of those failed programs led to us being asked to think about it. So as we know, the double-loaded corridor is the most effective and efficient and affordable way to get a lot of people in a box. You have the least amount of shared space, you have the least amount of exterior facade, and you have the most dreadful experience. And so since the climate was quite mild there, we pushed for the ability to have exterior circulation. Because of that, because we wouldn't have mechanized climatization, we could have cross ventilation through the courtyards. And because of that, you can suddenly start seeing others in your building at different heights as well. But still, we thought we need to introduce a further level of particularity in the units, so that everybody can sort of find a home that fits them. 50 square meters and 70 square meters, so 2 and 3 bedrooms. It's mostly 3-generation families living together, so the grandparents, the parents, and the kids. And the condition was that you would have you could prove that you had work, but it didn't have to be legal work. So the first occupant was somebody who does hair braiding on the street, who moved in with her son. And so it was not just an architectural challenge, it was also like a governmental challenge of how to organize the community around this. We thought we would make it very cheap with precast panels. Oh, sorry. We had an idea of precasting that would be very simple, so we asked for a mock-up, and they gave this as a mock-up for the precast panel. And they said, we're really good at masonry, by the way. They said, on the site, if you're interested, we can do masonry, but this is your panel. And we said, well, we really had this idea of these precast panels. And so we did it again, they did it again. I said, yeah, it didn't work. And so then they said, you know what is actually the case? He said, we can do precast, but there's only one guy who can do precasting. He's 5 hours away. He's the one with the truck. He's the one with the crane. He gives us a terrible price. To install one panel, we can have 30 people work for 30 days. And so, and then they said, wouldn't it be better to involve the people that will be living here actually in the creation of the building rather than this one guy who just happens to be in control of the tools? And so that made a lot of sense. And so what we did is we developed a block. We asked what is the maximum that one person can carry without a crane or tool, which is 17 kilos in the law in Mexico. And so we worked with a local cement maker on 2 blocks, actually 2 types, that are exactly 17 kilos, so you can carry it. And so one is the standard block, and then one is a hinge. And this hinge has sort of an awkward set of angles, because you saw the plan, it's quite sinuous and strange. And so this is in a way a hinge, but like a low-res hinge, because the window frame always needs to be at 90 degrees. And so this allows you, I'll explain later, to always hit that 90 degree, but create a completely sort of free pattern. And so the panel now is created out of these 5 blocks, rebar at the edges, and then an infill. And that was basically the game, the rule, and you could make the wall as long as you wanted. Here was a mock-up, we tested it. Because what we said is we just did an offset from the edge of slab, I think 60 or 80 centimeters in. And so the mason could start putting the block, and as soon as he hit the line, he puts in a hinge, he puts in the window frame, and he starts again. And so just by that rule, we didn't really need drawings, right? Because obviously it was really hard to control a construction site here, and it didn't make sense to have drawings. So we thought, rather than a drawing, you just explain the rules of the game, and you let the mason basically play the game. And that created a very free, form of the expression of the facade, much better, I would say, than the precast panels would have done. And we put them deeper, right, into the facade to allow for shading on the windows. The windows are open for cross ventilation on both sides. It's a very simple window system. And so here it was realized. So 56 units. We had $2 million construction cost in the neighborhood. And I'll take you through. I only saw it at the opening, but Iwan recently went back to take some pictures of how it's doing. So these are pictures in the book as well, and sort of a market formed around it. And yeah, real family life. There are some of these shared community spaces, and you see so it's 2 courtyards. One is more narrow, and the other is more open, but it has this secondary stair system that takes you through and up. This is where the 2 courtyards sort of meet. And it's exciting because there's a real pride in living in this building, and exactly the sort of these deepened facade, right? They get occupied with plants, and people start to sort of make it their own. We wanted to have the panels not flat, but is rotated so your view is not directly into somebody's home, and that's where that sort of pattern comes from. So people start to put their benches and plants and even children in there. So. Also, so the inner wall and the exterior wall are literally the same. So the insulation value of the block is enough. We were fortunate by this relatively mild climate. It's a little bit higher up in the hill. So literally, there's no. It's all natural. Ventilation in the inner wall is the outer wall. And it's just exciting. Iwan gets people to take off their shirt immediately, and how people made it their own space. So then, how do we bring that to New York City, to Brooklyn? Our office is down the street here. So Sam and Seba, who I just introduced, we've been working with them for a while, and maybe this project that we did in Mexico gave them some confidence that they wanted to try it with us. This was their first building, was our first building for homes in New York City. What is nice about this drawing, you see, image, you see Manhattan here. This is downtown Brooklyn that has been rezoned. There's like big towers going up. There's Genie Gang, there's shop, there's everybody. That's the edge of the zoning line. Here's brownstone Brooklyn, so those nice townhomes, somewhat based on the Amsterdam Canal House, where the stoop is really important. This is now a landmarked area with greenery, but private greenery in the donut, and then pretty green streets. And then obviously NYCHA housing, New York City Housing Authority housing, which up till the 70s were built throughout the city, and other than European cities where all the housing is typically at the perimeter. What is quite good in New York City is that the housing was built, throughout neighborhoods everywhere, but also, for instance, right here with the typical sort of tower in the park typology. And actually, these buildings are quite good, but they're very under-maintained, and there is somewhat of a stigma around it. So in the 70s, they stopped building these, and now affordability is integrated within the development of projects at a certain scale. Later about that more. So our site here is right on that corner between this urbanity that has a certain relationship with the exterior and this type of density on a corner. And so we wanted to think through and introduce a lot of the values that I already have been speaking about, but sort of how do you live in the city? How do you connect to the city? How do you live with others? How do you negotiate between these typologies? And so rather than making the solution on a corner would be an L-shaped building with a corridor, elevator in the corner and 2 corridors with units on both sides. And maybe that would have given more units, but probably maybe less value. But that was certainly something we needed to prove with this project. And so I will try to get a little bit technical, but basically in New York, you have gross and net, and gross is the buildable area, and net is the area you can sell. And so some things are calculated within the net, and some are in the gross. And so you have, when you have a FAR, it's your net, which basically means if you have a FAR of 2, you can build so much floor area that you can sell. But the things that are pushed out, they don't count to your net. So for instance, if your corridor is on the outside, it doesn't count. Whereas if it's on the inside, it does count. So what we actually did here is we maximized the net for homes and put all the other spaces to the exterior that were, in a way you could say, free space. We still had to build them, of course, but they sort of added. And so the building has a lot of volume, and that is because there's a lot of exterior sort of additional shared space. And it's actually 3 buildings that you see here, 1, 2, 3, that are connected by this exterior walkway, courtyard in the middle. Here you see the plan. We write a little bit about all the math behind it. And here you see sort of how this is a quite, it has a lot of volume. It's also because all the balconies, we gave 2 and sometimes 3 balconies to the apartments. They also don't count in the net. And some way you could say that's sort of additional, and people value it, although you don't, like 1 balcony or 2. We try to create them as rooms rather than balconies sticking out, so that they can really be used, that you can have dinner on the balcony, that really sort of the outside is part of the experience of the interior. So Sam went to the bank, and he came back and he said, we didn't get a loan. And I said, why not? He said, yeah, they don't know. They said, the machine, the algorithm, basically the program didn't allow them to get a loan. And so he asked again, because it's very normal when you have an approved plan. You can get a construction loan and you go, and that's the way these projects are financed. And so they went back and they said, yeah, no, your ratios are off. You have too much facade for your floor area. So the program won't give you a loan. So in the financing model of New York real estate, this typology is not allowed. It doesn't exist in the spreadsheet. So they actually have to go. It's Sam and Seba. Seba is from Argentina. He went to talk to his uncles and a bunch of other people, and Sam spoke to his dad. And that's how we ended up building this building. But it also meant that we needed to be very thoughtful about the facade, because there was, per the computer, way too much exterior facade, way too much contact, so to say, with the city. And so we worked with a very simple block that we stacked, and we used some of the tricks that we had learned in Mexico by just giving it a slight rotation, which then gives it its expression rather than a fancy material. And that depth, again, sort of creates this porous edge between the city and the building. A friend of ours, he opened a gym on the ground floor in one space. And then when you come, because the ground floor, there's no basement, so there's like some shared space and a gym. And then you come in, and there's not a doorman and a lobby and an elevator, but there's this space, which really sort of invites you to take the stairs. When you arrive, most people immediately take the stair. There is an elevator, of course, but basically people start to walk up, because this is the space that you see where daylight comes down. And because of the sort of thermal mass actually of the building and the openness, it's really quite mild throughout the seasons. And so this is your way to your home, and suddenly you realize others living in your building. There's windows, into the space from the kitchen. Everybody has a sort of front porch where you can leave your stroller or your shoes or your packages or what have you. And certainly these walkways are sort of exciting, like viscerally also, in a sense that the coming home is somewhat of an adventure and an experience. We have little benches in these spaces for people to sit, take off their shoes, drop their stuff. And then the homes, pretty simple, because obviously we need to not spend the money on marble. So we leave the ceilings exposed, but here the balcony as a room that can be entered from two sides, from the kitchen and from the living room, so that it's really integrated within the plan. It's not just this thing where you go, incidentally. And so what is exciting is how that deepened space again gets occupied and taken over by the residents. There's shared greenery. Suddenly you actually learn that somebody on the fourth floor has the same dog as you have, and you can become friends. And in which places can you just throw your dog out to let him hang? So that project, despite all the naysayers, also the broker said, you guys are idiots, you're shooting yourself in the foot, ended up being quite a success. It was 18 units. And since then we've been working with them on 2 more projects that are about to get finished. I won't get into too much detail, but this is also on a corner. This is precast concrete. This is almost done. We try to not have any repetition in the plans. So these are 28 units with 21 unique housing plans. And again, every unit 3 sides of orientation. There's some townhouses and some larger apartments, and homes connected to the ground. It happens because the zoning is such. This is Vanderbilt Avenue, and this is Myrtle Avenue. Myrtle is a commercial street. Vanderbilt is a residential street. This is actually landmarked, so here we had to sort of continue the townhouses, and then suddenly there's 2 zoning jumps, and that creates sort of the massing of this building, which is also a quite prominent corner, and Vanderbilt is an important avenue. Not only because the first David Adjaye house in America is built down the street. Well, that's a side note. So this just finished non rational plans. Maybe this is the ground floor to the commercial street. This is a unit. There might be an Indian restaurant that goes in there, and then the entrance is on the side. And then we actually use the depth because the site slopes down to create a shared courtyard and a double lobby with townhouses here. I couldn't so quickly find the plans from above, but they're in the book. The exterior rooms indeed integrated. And this talks about another aspect which is very interesting, and I know that sustainability is something that you guys are talking about, and maybe you talk about passive house. But the problem of passive house is that it hates the exterior, and it wants you to build as enclosed and as tight an envelope as possible, and it doesn't allow for you to calculate cross ventilation, because cross ventilation is non-mechanized. And so the challenge with a lot of these buildings for us is to prove that they are meeting energy requirements, because that's only based on mechanized cooling. And so we have been working with the NYSERDA, New York, State Energy Research Department, on working through a model that is dynamically, okay, so the challenge with passive cooling, with like non-mechanized cooling, is it's very unpredictable. And so building code and simple ideas like passive house, they need to keep these very simple for people to apply them. But it does mean that more sort of complex plans that are actually much more maybe connected to the environment and connected to the exterior are not, they don't work within these models. So let's think about some of these models and what they produce. Especially, I think passive house is very well aligned with this idea of optimizing boxes and minimizing exterior and minimizing openings. Most of construction in New York is concrete, sort of cast in place. Here we work with precast panels for the facade with windows installed. Very quick construction process because of that, and quite exciting to understand the complexity, because everything is integrated within the panel, and then suddenly it's up and then it's there. It's pink. We use two finishes, so one is bead blasted and the other is acid edged, so it's the same panel but there's a slight nuance, and then it's fluted. You saw that here, so that again it works with the texture of the light as well. And so this corner is an important corner. It's one of the most prominent corners. So I wanted to create a golden statue like Melnikov's parking garage, but the client didn't want that. But what we were able to keep is this sort of expressive corner. This is dropped. This is almost finished. So these are the instructions to the renderer, because they need to. I think in the Netherlands you can sell your apartment before you start construction, but in the US you have to have it pretty much built before it can be on the market. So this is the moment actually only when people start trying to represent it, which is strange because the building is pretty much done. So we're like working on renders now, right, when the thing is almost finished. But outside circulation. So again, and then last, this is one that's also almost finished. I will end with this one because we are now working on a much larger building, and on this scale, it needs to incorporate affordability. It's 27% affordable, and this is a rental building, so suddenly a completely different. All these other buildings are sort of what you call market rate, which means it's up to the market to see if it works. But in this case, because there was rezoning, this is the Gowanus Canal in Brooklyn, which is very polluted. You still see the pollution. There was a lot of dye industry here, and it's being cleaned. And then it was densified. So the way the city works in New York is they rezone, and that allows developers to come in. But then it can give a lot of conditions to that rezoning. And in this case, the rezoning was you had to incorporate 27% affordable in your in your housing, and that makes the project much more complicated. This is 127 units, and we try to work and incorporate all the values and all these qualities that we had discovered in these smaller projects into this building. And so one of the things we insisted was that every unit would at least have two orientations, if not three, by making this rotating the unit in a way on the site, which gives it, of course, this expression. Some of the areas we kept the exterior corridors, and rather than making a single straight corridor, it's more sort of an idea of series of rooms and thinking through that sequence of moving through that space. That's a simple image showing just the multiple orientations of the apartments. So 30% again more facade than a regular box would have. A lot of challenges with everybody to make it work, but we are in construction now, and it will almost be finished. And so this is our team. Marlena is here. She's also on this picture. She's worked on the project here in the Netherlands with us. And so on our roof, we like to have a lot of diverse voices in our office from all different places. And there, the QR code. Thank you.
Oh ja, mag je deze
Ja.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you. I'm sure there's people who want to ask questions, but maybe I could go first. I noticed that well, actually quite a few of the projects you talked about getting the materials within a mile away, including the builders from the side of the village, etc. Is that pragmatism, or is it financial, or is it ideology?
I think all together. Yes. No, I think we started to think about that much later. I don't think you talk about this in school. You don't really think about it when you draw. I think what is happening now, in some way, there is a lot of conversation in school around, say, ethics, right? But it's very hard to see how some of those intentions translate into form or into building. And so for us, I think it's also an emerging insight. From the beginning, actually our first project we built ourselves, which was a temporary installation. So the idea of labor in a way is very much from the get-go, and yeah, you saw it with the project in Kukje as well. I think it started maybe more subconsciously, and only after this Mexico project we realized, okay, there is actually, if you have a construction budget to distribute, you have to think through who is benefiting from that, especially in that case where it was public money. And so that's how we started to think about it more, and since then it becomes in a way second nature. And I think it is a combination of, well, it's certainly, if you want to make a building, in some way it has to work within reality, and often reality is also a financial reality, so that's one. But then there's many ways still that you can make something affordable, and it can happen through prefabrication and serialization and like standardization, or it can be by working with craft and in a more local way, and that creates sort of particularity, I think, between the different buildings as well. So I think it emerged as something that we are much more aware of, and we very early on start thinking through sort of who will build this, and for whom are we building this, yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned that your partner is often describing herself as a communist. So it's about who owns the materials of production.
Yeah.
That's kind of clear in some of the projects. Yeah. And is that, can you use these principles, well, in Mexico, obviously, but can you also use them when building in New York or Brooklyn?
Interestingly enough, it's not very different, because most construction sites in New York is all Latin American labor, like literally. Yeah, so you have to speak Spanish. When you reach the high point, the Argentinian flag goes up, the Bolivian flag goes up. Basically, it's all carpenters. So it's very similar, I think. Yeah.
And
At least on the
yeah.
scale. Like if you build
Yeah.
a skyscraper, it's a very different story. It's mostly Italians. Yeah.
But it seems from your oeuvre that you're also increasingly building more cultural arts hubs, musea. Is there a kind of a similar learning curve in those buildings, also going from the arts buildings to the housing ones, or?
Not maybe so much around the labor aspect, but I think one of the things that we are recognizing, especially the art world, has changed dramatically and became somewhat sometimes problematic world, which is heavily privatized and which is basically disguised banking to an extent. And so in some way we try to create as much public space in a way with private money, so I think those first two projects, it's like how can you push that, like that is paid for, those buildings are paid for by, say, the art market, but how do you create as much of a public space in that as possible? So that's where this idea of porosity and this deepened space comes in. So it's like, how do you create that in between? I think all of what we're trying to say is how do you soften this line between inside and outside, between private and public, between interior, exterior, and not so much. I think it's exactly within this zone that is ambiguous maybe and undefined is where these exchanges can happen. Yeah.
So do you have a preference? Because a program doesn't seem to be the most important thing in your work. Do you have a preference where your office will develop, in what direction?
I think one of the things that we do enjoy most is that every project is like in a completely different place and in a completely different reality and context. We were just in Albania. It's a really different context. Crazy.
And you're doing something in Amsterdam?
Yeah. That's
That
also
is
crazy,
weird.
actually. Yeah. This well, the only one, I think. Yeah, we'll see. No, but I think so, and this has more to do with curiosity and an interest, and I think also really understanding how, in all these different conditions, these forces work in a way. So, I think what we're trying to, which is very inefficient, is we're not trying to repeat ourselves. And I think, but nothing is more fun than to come into a new, context and work with people there and figure out how you can, create something that is. Yeah, contribute.
Thanks. Let me open this to the audience. Someone have a question? Wouter?
Oh my God, my thesis advisor.
No.
Yeah.
No, it's a very simple question, purely out of curiosity, of course. In one of the projects for Brooklyn, you said that in 28 units you had 21 unique floor plans. Why is that a quality, since you can only live in one floor plan at the same time?
It's true. It's true that if you make all the same floor plans, it doesn't necessarily mean that all the same people end up living in those units. But we felt that when there's more difference, you might get a more, diverse group of people inhabiting a building. So it's in some way, spreading the type of people that might be interested in living there. Well, this one is going on the market soon, so maybe we can see. But no, well, it is very interesting. For instance, this other building. Okay, it gets maybe it gets a little bit anecdotal, but there's very different. This is a building which has a 1-bedroom, and this is a small building in between. Here's a picture. Again, you see the sort of stack of like really all different types to an extent. So, for instance, on this in this building, which has perimeter all the way on the exterior. It has 2 bedrooms, a 1 bedroom, and 2 bedrooms. All the 1 bedrooms were immediately sold, mostly bought by parents for students who want to move money out of their country of origin into here. But so that sort of produced like one stack of like almost exactly the same demographic, which is maybe good for a community as well. But if we had made these the same types, it would be the entire building. And so maybe this is, you know, how you, so here it started, we saw at least a very clear relationship between the type and the type of person that moved in there. Yeah.
But, I can imagine that up to a certain number or up to a certain scale, but if you have like 21 different units on a number of 28, doesn't it also come into, I was just wondering, maybe that's not the case, but does it also come into play the fact that you can, that it's a luxury idea, that it's a luxury to live in a unique floor plan?
Yeah, it's a luxury, but where I think
like a
that
bespoke suit.
what, well, it's not bespoke because it's not yet. You know what I mean? It's more. There's like a whole bunch of sizes, and you need to figure out which one you can fit in. We're not tailoring it for the person. It means typically more work for us, and more work for the builder. Yeah. So that's you could say that's what we contribute. Yeah.
But there's a discussion here that's really a déjà vu discussion, because of course your mentor Weber would say exactly the same as Wouter is saying, like everything should be the same.
Yeah.
But then I saw a few other things in your work that is more like his adversaries in the 70s.
Yeah.
That is about diversity, that
Yeah.
is about inclusion,
Yeah.
that is about little benches
Yeah,
next
nooks
to
and
the
crannies.
door.
It's like Herman Hertzberger is almost
Yeah.
around. Yeah, be careful. Yeah.
Yeah, you're a mix
Yeah.
between
Weber
Weber and his
Be-
worst enemies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Perhaps. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a roast.
I have some really easy questions,
Okay.
but you might not want to answer them. Well, the first one is in Lyon. Is you managed to come up with some construction principle?
Yeah.
Is that now something that is going to happen more often? Did you give that to them? Are they here? Just do it now.
Well, the block is now on the website of this small company as the soil block, so they have that. Yeah, and
yeah.
the rings in Kukje. There's many people that have tried to, or come. Like we are not in the business of, like we didn't patent these things.
You're not started a factory yet.
No.
And
No,
not interested.
no, because it's not interesting. I think it's much nicer to figure out per place something. So I think that's it's more a method than it is. Yeah. So yeah.
Second question, so it also involves like the project you're doing in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
In Amsterdam, and it's really interesting, the whole story of the facade, and that is the most expensive part of your building. So now in Amsterdam we have the kind of the ratio that you cannot make any tower smaller than 700 square meters almost, because then if you make
Your ratio is
really
off.
tight,
Yeah.
if you just, is that your tight
Suit.
parameter of your facade, then you can just manage to build it.
Like a legging.
And so it's quite impressive, and it seems you have some kind of formula. So maybe like a cook who doesn't want to give up his recipe. But what did you do to make the facade so cheap that it's possible to make more? Because I do believe that this kind of making these interesting facades, it opens up a building and it really speaks. And
It's
it's
a-
really nice, and we cannot do it at the moment.
This
in
is all
Holland.
CMU block. This is just cement block, right? Which people would find really hard, although Van Eyck tried. No, in Sonsbeek, like how do you work with simple block? And sometimes these materials have like associations. Actually, when whatever people wrote about this, and everybody says, "Oh, you're a luxury prison," and there's like an association with some of these materials, and people feel they're very simple, cheap materials in the first place.
Just cheap.
Yeah.
And is it cheap in Holland as well?
I think apparently
It's cheap in
again that really differs per area. Yeah. And here we rotate the block, so that is what gives the texture. We're now actually this building, the big one that is on the real challenge. The only variation we have is that we can introduce a colored grout, so a color in the brick, and then the builder found out that so we had drawn the grout, the gap at 3/4 of an inch, which is like this. He said if you take out 1/8 of an inch of the grout, so because this whole building is designed on the unit of a brick, like literally it's just brick, you design it on the brick, so we use also software of course to optimize them. But then the grout, if we take out 1/8 per brick, we would save, I don't know, $200,000. So we had to redesign the entire building once again to reduce, like 3 millimeters out of every grout distance. And that affects everything again, right? But so that's the sort of fine tuning that needs to happen. Yeah.
Dan.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the beautiful talk. But maybe following Vanna's question, I have the feeling that there's indeed, it has to do with the way of building that happens in the US. That's maybe way more on site,
Yeah.
and, and maybe also a very normative building culture in Holland.
Yeah.
That basically says, okay, we always do it like this.
Yeah, that's
so
how we
don't
do
even
it.
come up with an idea that's different than doing it like this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I think maybe it also has to do with the fact that you build with columns and floors instead of walls and floors. Is
Yeah.
that might because your volume? I think
course.
it's not just the facade; it's actually the volume that is way more expressive.
Well, exactly, because I think, for instance, we tried to work with our friends in Arnhem on affordable housing, and there the idea of the plaatvloer, right, which is basically a predefined
Edge.
Yeah. So the interesting thing that you're working with a lot of carpenters on site is that the slab edge can have a lot of variation, right? Because if you look at this, there's very little repetition in the slabs here. You can do these kind of things, but that's all basically because it's like there's a lot of labor on site rather than like big
Tunneling, rather than tunneling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So in that sense, it's more bespoke. But also, this is very different from all these buildings next door, right? Because they're all standard extrusions with a curtain wall, boom, 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 boom. So,
But is it then the client, or is it,
Yeah.
or is it? So it's in the end the client that made a difference.
it's those two guys. It's Sam and Seba. Sam used to work for Foster for 15 years, and Sam was the son of Seba. Used to work for Foster. Sam was the son of Tom Main. So, yeah, yeah,
That's a nice job, actually.
yeah. No straight edges there. That's for sure. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I was kind of fascinated and not really surprised in a sad way with your anecdote with struggles with the financial model and
Yeah.
not getting a loan. And since the building was built and you're building a couple of more now, it seems that you have a way of navigating this financial, let's say, framework now. I was wondering what's your, let's say, what's your experience with how can we as architects try to counter these very rigid financial models and open them up to for more diversity?
Yeah.
In a sense, should we battle numbers with numbers now and try to quantify?
Oh yes, yeah, I mean
Yeah.
in that sense yes. Meaning, so this first project, which was the smallest, right, was 18 units, was the proof, in a way. So, and again, I think every building industry, every market, the reason why. So there's some WhatsApp situation going on here. So Brooklyn we saw all the different lots. So we saw the brownstone Brooklyn standard. Like, I don't know if you've been to Brooklyn, but basically the standard lot is 25 feet wide by 40 feet deep, which is a small lot, right? I think the smaller the lot, the easier it is for people to build something themselves, or the smaller you can be as a developer, as an entity. All these massive lots, and in sort of contemporary urbanization, there's this super block, right? The super block can never be built by a small entity. It's a massive, it becomes a multi-use, multi-tower. So I think the most important thing is that you make sure that you first have small lots, in a way, because it creates, more opportunity for smaller types of builders. And so that was the case in Brooklyn, because all these buildings are like 1 or 2 or 3 lots, rather than a mega block. And so then I think for the first project, the broker said this will never sell, because they look at precedents, right? What has been happened before. Now there is one example, and there's going to be a second example, and then a third, and then when you go to the bank and you tell the story and you say this is what, so that's small steps. And certainly this project would have never happened without the small steps that we did before.
Is this one? Okay. But in the end, in a sense, it needs a change in design culture now, or in building culture, more than, let's say, arguing for individual projects through trying to maybe evaluate, measure the value of
where do you have leverage, right? Where can you actually do something?
Fair.
I mean, so we showed these projects at some point related, which is a very big developer who did the High Line and is a little bit problematic figure. He asked us to come and present our work. And this guy was, I love it, it's fantastic, it's great. I said, I wrote one word down, inefficient. And that was the end of the meeting. I never saw him again, because, if you can build this and make money, it's simpler, faster, it's like so we either need to educate way more architects, and everybody needs to become a developer as an architect. But if you would just learn Excel, yeah.
This is a lesson that I wish that also the municipality of Rotterdam would learn, to make the lots smaller instead of bigger. Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, maybe in respect to what you were just saying, I was wondering what the role actually is of the the planning department of the city. How do they respond to this type of?
Well, the nice thing of New York City zoning, and it goes again with these small lots, is that it is super straightforward. And so I will say we got our permits for that outside circulation. In Brooklyn, I think at the time there were 12 building inspectors. 6 of them were in jail for racketeering. So there was only 6 left. And you saw what was being built behind. So this just went through the planning department. And then he came for the final inspection, and he walked around and he was like, what is this? Because he had never, thought this through. And then in the end he said, I hate it, but I have to approve it. And so it's actually a lack of oversight and a lack of definition, and it is sort of a somewhat laissez-faire, right, attitude. But that's the nice thing of New York, but that's also why there's also a lot of bad things being built. So that's the difficulty. When we started to build here in the Netherlands, and actually Marlene has been working on this for a long time, I told her it's really hard to do a bad building in the Netherlands, but it is really, really hard to do a good building in the Netherlands.
Anyone else? Questions? No? Then we, oh, yeah.
Otherwise we take questions at the bar also.
It's a fascinating story also how you come from a certain education system where I think also in the 80s in the Netherlands
90s, huh?
90s at least there was this generation which was promoting this extreme rationalism, all from affordability of housing, over this whole generation where that was a crazy topic. Moving also to these very industrialized and standardized production methods, and that still permeates in design culture nowadays. Efficiency is really key in all what we do. Do you feel that now sustainability is also pushing for that type of rationalization?
Yeah.
Because you mentioned, extra facade surface, passive house, that all
They work
pushes us in
together.
a certain
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah.
And is that something we have to fight or we have to accommodate?
I think you have to at least well know what all these rules mean and what all these numbers mean and what all these charts mean, because there's a lot of not nonsense, but it is certainly driven also by certain industries, and like certainly. Okay, I mean the argument is ultimately for us, we are very interested in us being able to be connected to the exterior and to be sort of aware of the weather. And like an example in New York is you cannot have a non-climatized interior space. I don't know how that is in the Netherlands. Can you have, for instance, like you used to have non-climatized homes, like parts of the home. I think there you could start to think about, for instance, what is happening. I mean, we have, of course, bathrooms and hallways don't need to be climatized necessarily, right? At a certain, so where's the envelope, for instance? Is the envelope, at your shirt? Is your envelope in the living room? So I think that there is a lot of space. I understood in Germany now they're looking at just climatizing the living room, and everything else has less insulation value because it's, anyway when you sleep you want it to be relatively cold. And so that sort of there I think is where there needs to be a lot of things that need to happen. I think passive house just tells you make a freezer and keep the door closed, right? And that's not really, so there's needs to be other desires in a way that you need to test and challenge, and I think that is certainly something where we could work. Then, code needs to be simple, because if code gets very complicated, then nobody can follow it. So that's the difficulty. The code is typically the dumbest thing in a way, right? Because otherwise you can't have everybody adhere to it. So that's a challenge. Yeah, I don't know. There might be some people that have ideas about this in this room also.
Yeah, but we save them for the bar.
The bar, very good.
The roast is over.
Yeah, thank you.
And well, we hope to welcome you in Rotterdam as a builder as well, as an architect.
Yeah.
Thanks once more.
Okay,
It was
my pleasure.
wonderful.
Thanks for coming.
And yeah. And hope to see you at the last Friday in October, when we have Pedro Gardanho, who's a Portuguese architect and who will be talking about some of the issues of sustainability and climate change and adaptation as well. So welcome, and see you at the bar now.